Welcome to MSPTDA video number 5. And in this video, we're going to talk about Power Query's amazing Excel.CurrentWorkbook function so we can take all of the Excel tables in the current workbook and append them into a single table. The Power Query function we're going to look at, Excel.CurrentWorkbook. If you go to Microsoft Help, it says this function returns the tables in the current Excel workbook. If that was true, we would have no problem. Microsoft Help would be trustworthy. But Excel.CurrentWorkbook actually returns, yes, Excel tables using the Excel table feature, but it also returns defined names, print ranges, and even filtered ranges. So we want to see 1, 2, 3 examples. We want to see how to append all the Excel tables in the current workbook to the worksheet. And we'll see that there is a recursion problem. In this example, we will not have any defined names or other objects besides Excel tables. Then we'll solve the recursion problem in our next example where we append all the Excel tables to the pivot table cache. That will work if our goal is to take all the tables and create a pivot table, and we won't have the recursion problem. And then in our third example, we'll append all the Excel tables in the current workbook that has defined names and other objects which get in the way. Now, the file we're going to start off with is 0501 MSPTDA. That's the start file number 1. We'll actually have to open up the number 2 start file when we do our third example. Now, let's go look at the data in this sheet. On the sheet ZAN, there's a table, date, product, units, and sales. These are actually the tables that we saw last video. But in that video, we had external Excel workbooks that contain these tables. But notice we have 4 columns, and there definitely is the name of the sales rep on the sheet. We also want to notice that this is an Excel table. Excel.CurrentWorkbook is going to pull Excel tables, not sheets of data like we saw last video. Also, we want to make sure that we know the name, ZAN Sales Table. There's a Bo with a Bo sales table. You can see the name up there. Quinn, Fran, Tyrone, and I left Poppy's sheet not as a table, so later we can convert it to a table and see that everything will update. All right, I'm using Office 365, so my Power Query is in the Get and Transform Data and Queries and Connections group. Earlier versions, you either had an add-in or your Get and Transform was on the right. Now, we want to get data, but we want to get it from the current workbook, and we want to start with a blank query. Now, watch how many clicks I had to do. Data, get data from other sources, and then all the way down to blank query. All right, I'm going to do that. Next time, I'll show you the longest keyboard I know. Now, this is a blank query. Always the first thing we want to do is name it smartly. I'm going to call it something like all tables. That name will become very important later. Now, all we have is an empty step. That's just the name of the step. We don't see anything up in our formula bar. If we went to Advanced Editor, we see that our transformations always start with let. Then it lists all the steps. And then whatever the last step is comes after in so that that's the output. But we don't have anything. So guess what? We're going to type it right up in the formula bar. Equal sign. Internally up in that advanced code, now it says sources equal to, and then we Excel.CurrentWorkbook. Open parentheses, close parentheses. Now, Power Query is case sensitive, and it does matter that everything is spelled correctly. All right, so we have capital E, C, and W. When I hit Enter, it should look through this workbook and bring in all of the official Excel tables. So far, so good. I can click off to the side, not on the word table, and I see each one of my proper data sets. Now, before we click our Expand button to append all of these tables one on top of each other, I would like to get the sales rep name. Now, this is the name of the table, not the name of the sheet. Last video, when we got external Excel workbooks, we used Excel.Workbook Function, and that was able to pull in sheets. But here, this function is going to pull in tables. No problem. Our policy is always we have the sales rep name, and then it always says sales table. So we can simply replace sales table with nothing. So with the name column selected, I come up to replace values. Now, value to find, I type sales table, and hopefully I spelled it exactly right. And I'm going to replace it with nothing. Click OK. Now, these sales rep names will be included on each row for each one of these tables. All right, now we're ready to expand. I click Expand, uncheck Use Original, because I don't want content to begin each column name. Those columns are fine. I want all of them. Click OK. Now we can change the data types for all of our columns. I'm going to click on the icon ABC123. That means it doesn't have a data type yet. And I'm going to come down to date, product, text, units, whole number, sales, currency. That means we can have a maximum of 4 digits to the right of the decimal. I'm going to click currency, and that's text. All right, now remember this name column, that came from the table name. Our query name is all tables. In our first example here, when we close and load, we're going to close and load it as an Excel table in the sheet. And the query name becomes the Excel table name down in the worksheet. You can already maybe see there's a problem. But let's go ahead and do this. Close and load to. I want it as a table. On a new worksheet, click OK. Immediately, I'm going to come down here and call this the same thing, all table. Now notice we have 1, 2, 3 different objects in this Excel workbook, all named all tables. That's an Excel worksheet. That name there is for the table that Power Query loaded into the sheet. That's an official Excel table. It's also the name of the query. Now, the problem with adding this new Excel table, even though it's from Power Query, is that it is a table. If we refresh, like later when we add Poppy's data, then this all tables table will be imported and incorporated into this load output. That means if we refresh this, we'll get double the rows. Now, there's another interesting problem when we use Excel.CurrentWorkbook to import all the Excel tables. That 18,056 is one row too many. Now, one way to see that is to count all of the rows on each one of those tables in each one of those sheets. So I'm going to build an Excel formula and use the rows function. Rows will count how many rows there are in a range. Now remember, we have Excel tables on each one of those sheets. On the ZAN sheet, there's a table called ZAN Sales Table. So I'm going to type XA, and there it is. In the dropdown, that's the icon for an Excel table, and there's the table name. So I can hit Tab, close parentheses. Now I need to add, and I'm going to use rows again. Each time I'm using rows, I'm typing the name, and when I see the table icon, I can arrow, tab, and there we go. That formula will tell us how many total rows there are in all of the tables. And look at that, 18,055. So what is going on with 18,056? Well, when Power Query exported this, remember the name column is the name of the Excel tables. And if we go to the filter, and by the way, the filters are awesome, whether they're in Excel, Power Query, the data model in Power Pivot or Power BI Desktop. Anytime you click a filter icon, it will give you a unique list of items. And there it is. When we exported the query as an Excel table to the sheet, it took the original sheet name, Sheet 6, exclamation point, external data. Now we can fix that problem and the refreshing to get double the records problem by simply filtering in the name column back in the query. So I'm going to click Escape. Now let's do one last thing to prove to ourselves that we're in big trouble here. I want to refresh the query. I can either right-click Refresh, click on that icon to refresh, or from the table, right-click Refresh. And look at that. We have double the records. No problem. Now we're going to open up the query, double-click to edit. And there's the query name, I'm going to copy this, Control-C. And in fact, if you want to be on the safe side whenever you're using Excel.CurrentWorkbook and dumping it to the sheet, just copy the query name, then come over to the Filter dropdown on our Table Name column. Text filters does not equal. Control-V. Now I click OK. There's that step that will get rid of our query table as part of the export. I'm going to click Close and Load to load back to the table. And sure enough, there we are. Exactly the number of rows we should have. All right, so if you want to import all of the Excel tables, dump them onto a sheet, be sure to take that query name and filter out that query name in the name column. Now our query will work just fine if we come over to Poppy. And here we have a new table. Control-T, Enter. That converts it to a table. Alt-J-T-A to jump me up and rename this. And we got to use the correct name. Poppy is the sales rep. Sales table. Hopefully I spelled it correct, and Enter. Now if I go back over to All Tables and refresh in one of these places, I'm going to use this icon this time. And there we have it. Poppy's records are included in our All table. Now if I click the drop down for name, there it is, Poppy. Click OK. Now for this first example, if we wanted to go look at the code, we come back into the editor, Home Ribbon tab, Advanced Editor. We can see the M code. Let is followed by our steps, then in, and the name of the last step, because that's what's delivered. Source, that was Excel.CurrentWorkbook. Replace values, use Table.ReplaceValue. Expanded content, Table.expand table columns. Change types, and finally filtered rows. We can see the name column should not be equal to the name, all tables. Now there's another way we could do this. If our goal was not to load it to the sheet, but simply take all of the tables in the current workbook and load them so we can build a pivot table, then instead of loading it to the sheet, we can load it to the pivot table cache. Now with this table selected, now I'm going to use a keyboard, but the feature I'm going to use is Home, over to Clear, and Clear All. I'm going to use the keyboard Alt-EAA. Now this gives us a message that says this is connected to a query. And it says, do you want to delete the query? Yes, I do. Now it's loaded as connection only. I come over and right-click Load To. And now I want to say Pivot Table Report. And I do not want it to the sheet. I want it on a new worksheet. I'm going to leave all tables in that formula right there. Now when I click OK, it'll load to the pivot table cache. I'm going to drag Product down to Columns. Name, that's the sales rep name, down to rows. Sales down to values. This is a standard pivot table, so I have to come over and right-click Number Formatting. Something like currency, 0 decimals, click OK. I don't like that name there because it's really sales rep, so I'm going to come back to my query, double-click, and then add a step. Actually, now that we have loaded to the pivot table cache, we do not need that step. Remember, double-clicking that to open it, that was where we filtered out all tables. We do not need that, so I exit out. Now I'm going to double-click and call this Sales Rep and Enter. Close and load. Now we saw in an earlier video that we had to do a double refresh with pivot tables, except when we load it straight to pivot table cache. So of course, it updated here, and it took that field off of our pivot table. We simply drag it down to rows, and there's our pivot table report. I'm going to double-click this sheet and call it something like Pivot Table Report. For the second example, if we want to look at the M code, we come back into the editor, Home Ribbon, Advanced Editor, click, and the steps are almost the same. We deleted the filtered rows and added rename columns. That's where we changed name to sales rep. Now those are our first two examples. If your goal is to simply make a pivot table from all of the different tables in a workbook, load it to pivot table cache, that's the best. If you have to load it to a particular sheet like we did over here, then we have to make sure and filter out the query name. Now we want to go look at our third example. Now I opened up our second Excel workbook for video number 5. Each one of the sheets are the same. Tyrone. Poppy, however, is totally different. And they did some extra work off to the side. Now, if this extra work had nothing to do with define names, it would be fine. We could convert this to a table, and it would be imported. But let's just take a tour of what is on this sheet. Well, the first thing is someone set up advanced filter. That's the criteria range. This is the extract range. That means they were on data, and they did advanced filter. Anytime you do advanced filter, 2 defined names are created. Criteria and extract. Someone also created a print area. That's when you go up to layout, print area. Now, these are both innocent enough things, but if you don't know that these create defined names, when you try to use Excel.CurrentWorkbook, those objects get imported. There's also a defined name. Someone named this over here using the name box. If we wanted to, we could go up to formulas, up to name manager, or we could use Control F3. And we can see the icons. There's a table. These are defined names. There's print area. Now notice there's no filtered database here. That is a hidden name. Actually, we learned about that in last video. Now, the Excel.CurrentWorkbook function is different than the function we learned last video. Last video, we used Excel.Workbook. And that function brought information back about the different objects. Well, as we'll see, our Excel.CurrentWorkbook does not do that. So we're going to have to get a little tricky if we want to filter out everything and just import tables. All right, so we're going to go to Data, Get Data, from other sources down to blank query, or we can use the keyboard Alt-A-P-N-O-Q. Yes, that's the craziest, longest keyboard I know. And actually, it recently changed in newer versions of Excel. But if you do blank queries a lot, that's a lot faster than click, 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 clicking. All right, the first thing we're going to do is give this a smart name. I called it All Excel Tables. We come up to the formula bar equals Excel.CurrentWorkbook. Open parentheses, close parentheses, and enter. Now, we can go and look at the content column. That's an actual Excel table. It tells us that it's a table. Look at this, though. There is an error, and there's that filtered database. Anytime you use filter in any Excel workbook, there'll be this hidden name. And then down here, there's the criteria range. Notice these objects that are defined names always come in with column header names that say column 1, 2, 3, and so on. Every single one of these objects. Now, the error does not come in as a table. Now, for the names that were created automatically from some other feature in Excel, we could actually just filter those out. Does not end with filter database, does not end with criteria. But the problem is the defined names, we don't have any idea what those might be named. So that's where knowing that these objects get imported with this generic column 1 is going to come in handy. Now, the trick is going to be we have to, in an extra column, somehow look at that table object and pull out the first column. So for each one of these table objects, we need to do that. Luckily, this is a table object. And actually, later in this class, we'll look at all the different types of items and objects that are in Power Query. But for table objects, there's all sorts of table functions. Now, I'm going to open up Google and type something like Table Power Query Functions. There it is, Table Functions. And if we look down here on the left, there's all sorts of table functions. If we go down to the table section, wow, table.columnCount, table.columnNames. That's exactly what we want. You will not believe how many table functions there are. Really, when they designed Power Query, they gave us a function for everything. So we're going to try and use table.columnNames. Now, before we use table.columnNames, that one right there. Well, that one we're simply going to have to, and I'm going to click right there and cheat since I'm such a bad typer and speller. I'm going to copy this Control-C and then use the filter drop-down, text filters. Over to the drop-down, does not end with, and I'm going to Control-V. So we're only allowed to see objects that do not end with this. Click OK. So we got rid of the filter database. Now we need to add this extra helper column. Actually, it's called a custom column. So add column, custom column. And I'm going to name this get first column name, Table.ColumnNames, open parentheses. And we need the Table.ColumnNames functions to look at the content column. So I simply double click. Square brackets with the field name. That's called a field access operator or a lookup operator. Means it's going to go look up whatever over in the content column. Now, if I close parentheses, this will return a list of column names. So I'm going to click OK. We see the list object here, and we can click off to the side. A list is different than a table in that it is an ordered list of items. Now, we can see off to the side. Look at that. Those are all the field names. And when we come down to criteria, sure enough, column 1, column 2, column 1, column 2, 3, 4. Now, these are a list of items. And I would like to simply use a filter and say does not equal column 1, which means I want just the first column. So watch this. This is going to get wild. I'm going to double click to edit this. Now, we actually could have come up to the formula bar and edited it right there. Now we're going to use something called a positional index operator. Curly brackets, 1, curly brackets. Now, curly brackets in Power Query can be a positional index operator, or it can house a list. And we'll talk about that in a subsequent video when we go through all the different types of objects in Power Query. Now, if you're familiar with Excel, those curly brackets over in Excel mean an array. Now, one other thing is that 1 will not work. Even though we're interested in the first item in the list that Table.ColumnNames delivers, it's not really 1, because in Power Query, the base is 0. The first one is 0. The second one is 1. So I'm going to type a 0 here. In Power Query, 1 is really 0. All this means now is that from that list of items, I only want the first one. Now when I click OK, I have exactly what we want. These column 1s, I'm simply going to click the filter, text filters, does not equal column 1. Click OK. Now we do not need this column, so I'm going to right-click remove. I want to double-click and call this SalesRep and enter. I want to either go up to Home, Replace, or right-click. Replace values. Sales table. Sales table. Replace with nothing. Click OK. Now I'm going to build in a safeguard here just in case. So I have the ability to load this wherever I want later. I'm going to copy that, and we're going to do our same trick to avoid the recursion problem when we refresh and it tries to import the table that's dumped in a sheet. So I click the drop-down, text filters, does not equal, Control-V, click OK. Now I can expand, uncheck Use Original, click OK. Change the data type, date, text, whole number, currency, and now we're done. Close and load to. Actually, I should have just clicked the button up there without going to the second option, because the default, if you click the close and load to, is table on a new worksheet. I'm going to click OK. I can see my 18,000 rows are loaded. I'm going to double click and call this something like all Excel tables. Now I'm going to come over to Poppy. Control-T, enter. Alt-J-T-A. Poppy sales table. And remember, I better spell that right, and enter. Now I can come over to all Excel tables, right-click refresh. And there we go. And finally, in our third example, if we want to look at the M code, we come to the editor, Home, Advanced Editor. Our transformation starts with let. Source is Excel.CurrentWorkbook. Filtered rows, that's where we filtered out. Ends with filtered database. Then we added a custom column. And remember what we did. We used the Table.ColumnNames function. And for each row, it went and got the content. Those square brackets were the lookup operator. Curly brackets are the positional index operator. 0 means please get the first item. Then once that delivered all of the first column names, filtered the rows so they did not include column 1. Then we removed columns, renamed columns, replaced values. That's where we searched for sales table and replaced it with nothing. Filtered the rows. That's where we made sure that the query name was not included in the table name column. Finally, we expanded the columns and changed the type. In is always followed by the last name of the last step. That way, that last step is delivered as the final result. Now, really, the whole setup of this is a crazy, non-standard, non-structured way of keeping data. But in the Excel world, people keep data in lots of crazy ways. So if you really do have data, Excel tables on different sheets, and you want them all in one table or pivot table cache, we can definitely use Excel.CurrentWorkbook. All right, so we saw 3 important examples how to append all the Excel tables in the current workbook to a worksheet using this amazing function. And we filtered out the resulting query Excel table. Then we saw how to load it to the pivot table cache and avoid the recursion problem. And then we saw how to append all the Excel tables if we had defined names in the workbook. All right, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excelisfun, including our next MSPTDA video, number 6. We'll see how to take multiple external Excel workbooks and merge them into a single table. All right, we'll see you next video.